Hello and welcome to this week's podcast. This week, an Ashes special. We've got our junior school head of cricket, Mr. Scott, senior school head of cricket, Mr. Gibson, for their insight in all things Ashes cricket. I'm McCluskey, this is McCausland.
Yeah, cricketing tragic. Not really sure where I fit into the piece here, but I'm going to do my best.
We've been very fortunate, actually, because Mr. McCausland will be giving his Australian standpoint throughout this podcast, so really looking forward to what he's got to say about his home team. Mr. Scott, over to you. The squad announcement, any thoughts or feelings on it?
Initially, I'm excited to be here, but on the Ashes squad, I think it's a very balanced squad. They've played it safe at times. There's a couple of wildcard picks in there as well, but a few boys that might be unlucky to be going on a Lions tour or not travelling at all.
And you made the reference earlier this morning, actually, when we were discussing it's probably better to be in the Lions squad at the moment than it is to be wearing a bib and running the water on.
Definitely so. If you're with that Lions squad, you're playing competitive cricket, hard cricket against the Australian A side and state sides. If you're carrying water for the first team, you're just netting and not getting that match experience.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, absolutely. Playing is always better than just being along the boundary rope, walking around with those water bottles. You get frustrated, lack of time in the middle. Mr. Gibson, over to you. Any notable absences or anybody you would have included potentially?
One guy that I would like to see in there is actually an ex-pupil, Rory Burns from City of London Freeman School. Good Surrey boy, he Banstead Cricket Club. Scored over 1,000 runs this year, and he's done that on a consistent basis now for a couple of seasons. I think he's done it for 4 seasons in a row. So, as Mr. Scott said, disappointing not to see him in the Ashes squad, but more so to not see him involved in the Lions squad as well.
And Mr. McCausland, over to you. A thoroughbred Australian. Any thoughts on your squad that could potentially be?
I'd just like to clarify that I am in fact from New Zealand.
Apologies about that.
Look, my concerns are primarily about the bowling attack, the English bowling attack. Jimmy Anderson's been bowling well. Obviously, Stuart Broad's there. Chris Wokes appears to be the logical third choice, giving a bit of extra batting for the English. But I get the feeling that they're a little bit similar to the Kiwis in that away from home conditions where the ball nibbles around a bit on the flat tracks of Australia, that they're going to be a little bit pop gun for the top order of Warner, Renshaw and co. I think you find Khawaja's a bit of a bully over there in Australia as well, and you've still got Smith, Hanscom and possibly Maxwell to come. So that's my primary concern for the English. Can they take 20 wickets in Australia and without a recognised spinner as well?
Okay, you've just mentioned the conditions over there, and I'm going to drop this in. I was actually out there in 2010, 2011, fortunate to be living in Brisbane, and I made it over for the Melbourne Boxing Day test. And certainly for me, the extra height of Tremlett came into it. Bresnan's aggressiveness as well. He's a hit-the-deck bowler, and I thought they both had a tremendous series. They've not really been seen in and around, and both have now faded out due to age, injury, etc. I'm just going to say Liam Plunkett. Has he got a space considering what has happened to Ben Stokes?
He doesn't at the moment. He's been pigeonholed a little bit by England recently as a white ball cricketer only, but has performed in the Championship this year. So he should be in and around the squad, or at least considered.
He's certainly got the height, and I think he's going to get a bit extra out of the Australian decks out there. Mr. Gibson?
Yeah, there's one guy out there that's a bit of a wild card pick, a good Devonian man. Craig Overton, a giant of a man, can bat pretty well as well, and I believe he's the quickest bowler in the Championship at the moment. So it might be that they look to sneak him in the order as well, maybe looking to replace a certain gentleman who's been on not best behaviour, unfortunately, over the last few weeks, so I'm sure we'll talk at a later date.
Yeah, we're going to tiptoe around that slightly. Ben Stokes, has he been managed correctly? I don't know. We won't make too many comments about his behaviour. I know that Mr. Scott and actually Mr. McCausland and Mr. Gibson potentially want to talk about how in English sport we manage these maverick personalities. Over to you, Mr. Scott.
I'm not sure historically England have done it well, or Great Britain really. You look back over time, you've got KP, you've got Andrew Flintoff. Cricket-wise, you've got Chris Gale over in the West Indies that wasn't managed particularly well. Other sports, you look at Ronnie O'Sullivan, Paul Gascoigne, Danny Cipriani. Do we manage Mavericks well in England?
Yeah, me personally, I look at Cipriani. Definitely, still, I think there's a place for him in the England squad, rugby-wise. Too early, too soon. Wasn't managed particularly well. Went out to Australia. He was out there similar time to me, and some of the stories I heard, I wasn't impressed with at all of his behaviour. Mr. McCausland, are there any Kiwis potentially that come to mind?
Brendan McCullum was famously quoted as saying that Jesse Ryder was the biggest waste of sporting talent in the modern era, cricketing-wise anyway. His problem was that he just simply didn't want it enough, and that no matter what what achievements he made, or no matter what privileges he was given by New Zealand cricket, he simply just couldn't stay away from the bottle. His time over in county cricket only seemed to make things worse. But unfortunately for Jesse, he just couldn't find a way back into the New Zealand cricket setup with the attitude that he had.
Okay, and I think we're all in agreement that Ben Stokes, an absolute talent, potentially, depending on what happens, he's going to be missed in the Ashes squad. It's going to be a huge blow. I know that some people have paid to go out there and tour, are absolutely fuming with him, because you want to go out to Australia, you pay all that money, you want to see one of England's best players, if not one of the world's great players at the moment.
New Zealand born?
New Zealand born indeed. Northern upbringing. Good knowledge from you. You've been at Google again, I see. Mr. Gibson, how would you go about managing a temperament, a maverick, the sporting ability of Ben Stokes?
A very good question to that one. We look at some other leaders within the English sport setting. We look at Wayne Rooney and Dylan Hartley have also been more so on the field issues, but also some off-field issues as well. And as Mr. Scott's already said, it's been very difficult to manage those maverick-type characters. Without going into what he's done specifically, it's going to be a very difficult one to overcome. These guys have got massive leadership roles. I think it's the message has to be sent out that obviously unacceptable behaviours have to be punished.
Michael Vaughan brought up the comment that it was definitely under the captaincy of Owen Morgan rather than Joe Root. I don't think that comes into it. We have this funny situation where we have multiple captains for England and therefore multiple leaders. We will tiptoe around the subject, and I'm sure it's been debated by the boys, the parents, it's certainly been debated by the staff at Kings, and there's more to come on it. Let's move away from that for now. I'm going to ask you, gents, Mr. Scott, the Gabba, Brisbane, first test, who do you pick?
Cook, Stoneman, Root, batting at 3. Vince, Bairstow, Ali. Folkes to keep wicket. Wokes, Broad, Anderson and Finn.
So you've loaded the batting lineup there. You've gone for some kind of result. I think my feeling is very similar, and I would load the batting to try and get potentially a draw in the Gabba and get the series off to a positive start. I'm going to move to our native Australian, Mr. McCausland. Could you just pick your starting team for the Gabba?
Once again, you're questioning my allegiance to the Kiwis there. I'm just going to go from the top. Warner, Renshaw, who's much more proven than the likes of Stoneman or Milan, if you like. Kawaja at 3, as I said, he's an Australian bully. Smith, Hanscom. I've got Maxwell down at 6, although they could potentially go for someone like Marcus Stoinis. Wade to keep wicket. And then the bowling attack of Cummins, Hazelwood, Stark. You've got a lot more power than the English. And you've got Nathan Lyon, who's also a more experienced spinner than Moeen Ali.
Okay, I would definitely agree with Mr. Scott in terms of picking Root at 3. He's good enough to bat wherever he wants in my book. I don't think it makes a great deal of difference if he bats at 3 or 4. Mr. Gibson, any thoughts, any changes from what you've heard on the England starting 11?
No, I'm in agreement with Mr. Scott. I think I have to say that. We work very closely together. There's a couple of changes that I'd like to probably see from his lineup. The 3 and 5 position have been a difficult position, and indeed the opening partner for England over the last few months. I'd probably stick with Milan and give him a go at 4 with Root batting at 3. And just a little one. I can't bring Burns in. Mr. Scott, he's just scribbled it in front of me. I'm not allowed to do that. I'm not an England selector, but I am going to go, rather than looking at Finn, I'm going to give Overton a go and bat him probably at 8 or 9, just to have strengthen that little bit of batting down the order as well.
Brilliant. Well, really thanks for those selections, gents. It wouldn't be a King's College Junior School Sport podcast without us discussing a little bit of junior school sport. We spoke a lot about the Ashes. A big shout out to the under 11B and under 10B football teams who took place in a Fulham prep tournament on Saturday. A really novel idea to get the B team boys out playing tournament football. Doesn't often happen for them. They're the ones that do miss out. The 11Bs won all 5 of their games during the morning. The 10Bs finished a very respectable third. I know Mr. Beattie was absolutely delighted with how they conducted themselves all morning. Mr. McCausland, anything from you junior school sport-wise at the moment?
The under 10Ds had their second win from 2 starts on Friday afternoon. A few Maverick personalities to manage in there as well. So, no, we were happy to get the result in the end, 2-1 out there at Cranmore.
Yeah, fantastic trip over to Cranmore. Mr. Gibson on under 9 football at the moment. Shrewsbury House came over yesterday.
Oh, it was a cracking morning of football yesterday. We had back-to-back fixtures, which meant that the first round was closely contested matches, and the A team, who I was working with Mr. Cheers, had that little bit of anxiety as we waited around for the strength of Shrewsbury House. Went 2-0 down. Heads didn't drop, which was great to see. Came back, scored one just before the half-time break. Snuck another one in the second half and then played some really, really good football, only for Shrewsbury House to score a bullet header in the last play of the game. It was, without doubt, their best performance of the season, despite the loss, and the boys should be very proud of how they conducted themselves and how they played yesterday.
Final words, Mr. Scott, on some junior school sport from your fine self.
So the under 9 FG and H's have had 2 really good games recently. It's good to see all the boys from top to bottom getting out. And again, this afternoon, I believe Wednesday afternoon, we've got the under 8s, every boy getting out and playing again. So,
yeah, looking forward to that. We're recording live on a Wednesday morning. Really looking forward to after school. Don Head coming over for under 8 A to H football. The boys are absolutely fizzing for it. Mr. McCausland, final words from you.
Have a great week and a safe half term.
Thanks very much. That's just our insights on the upcoming Ashes. We're incredibly excited. Thanks for listening, and we'll speak to you soon.